cities laboratory in Singapore, and 3D modeling, analysis and visualization of climate risks in urban areas.
So, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to our first Smart City Networking Days under the ASEAN Australian Smart Cities Trust Fund. It's a real pleasure for us to have an interesting 2 days where we can share knowledge and ideas, and we welcome you all who are attending us now. We'll also have a recording that we'll share later on, so for those who are not attending today, this will be recorded. My name is Jens Christian Ries. I'm the Communications and Outreach Manager for the ASEAN Australian Smart Cities Trust Fund, and normally I'm based in Ramble in headquarters in Copenhagen, but these days I'm in Vietnam talking to you from Ho Chi Minh City. Next slide, please. We have, and maybe we should go back just a few slides, if you don't mind, Christine, to the previous one, with the lineup of today. Yes, thank you very much. So for the introduction, today we have half an hour's introduction where we have invited two inspirational speakers, Mr. Legge Leonardsen, who is Head of Program for Resilient and Sustainable Cities at the City of Copenhagen, and Mrs. Catherine O'Regan, Executive Director of Cities Leadership Institute. So we are really looking forward to get your inputs. Thank you very much. Let's go down to the housekeeping announcements. Thank you. And we have this opportunity. We have a lot of participants from all over the ASEAN region, and we have the opportunity for you to choose a simultaneous translation. And you can either choose English, Cambodian, Indonesian, Lao, or Vietnamese. So please click on the interpretation button in the bottom or in the top of your screen and choose the language that you would like to prefer. Next slide, please. You are also welcome to use our live transcript icon, where you can see a full transcript of the presentations of what has been said, but this will only be available in English. Next slide, please. So who's in the room today? We have 200 registered participants, or actually a little more. We have participants from over 80 cities around the region and the globe. We are having participants registered from 28 countries, coming from government sector, private sector, NGO, academia. And we are looking forward to 2 days with 3 sessions every day. And this first session is just a brief introduction of half an hour. And then we have 2 times 1.5 hour session that you can choose from afterwards. As said before, 5 languages available. Next slide, please. So our objectives with this online event is to share lessons learned from the Trust Fund program on smart city development. It's to share and discuss new ideas, approaches, and lessons learned from other cities, and not least to facilitate our network among peers in the region and across. Next slide, please. So just a brief overview. As I said before, we have this brief opening session. Then we have 2 thematic sessions every day. Today, you can either choose working or joining us for a session on how digitalization can support smart city planning, or a session on digitalization to reduce traffic congestion. And in each of these sessions, there will be short presentations, 3 short presentations, and then we'll have a Q&A and a guided discussion session of 45 minutes, where you're very welcome to join in and share your ideas and experiences. And tomorrow we'll have another exciting day starting at 2 p.m. with 2 sessions on digitization in terms of resilience and inclusiveness in cities, and also a session on digitalization on how to improve smart city knowledge and capacity development. And finally, we'll have another exciting session, closing session, and plenary session on inclusive cities. Next slide, please. So the opening session will have our 2 keynote speakers, then we'll have a few final reflections and an overview of how you can join the parallel thematic sessions. Next slide, please. And with those introductory words, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mrs. Lykke Leonardsen, who is the head of program for resilience sustainable city solutions at the city of Copenhagen. More than 25 years of experience in urban development, economic development, physical planning. She's been heading the development of adaptation programs in the city of Copenhagen, the adaptation plan, but also she's worked on the implementation of the climate action plan for the city, aiming to become carbon neutral already by 2025. So currently she's running the program for sustainability and resilient city solutions in Copenhagen, and also working as an ambassador for Copenhagen's climate solutions. So a very warm welcome to you, Lykke, and yeah, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jens Christian, and a real pleasure to be here. It's early morning in Copenhagen, and I will talk very briefly about mainly our work on adaptation and resilience in Copenhagen. You should be sharing my slides. So if I can get the slides up, there we are. Go to the next one, please. So for Copenhagen, we have a vision of co-creation, working together with all the stakeholders in the city to create the most livable city in the world. So we want to be livable. We want to make sure that the city works on all levels. We also want to be responsible. And as Jens Christian mentioned, one of them is actually to thinking about how will we deliver the city to future generations, both when it comes to climate action, reducing carbon emissions, but also to making the city more resilient. And finally, we want to be what we call a city with an edge, meaning that we want to make a city that is inclusive, where there's room for people of all kinds and all kinds of businesses in the city, so that we are not too one-line city. Next slide. If you go back, this is how Copenhagen looked in the 70s and 80s, and in the early 90s, we were basically bankrupt, and the harbor was extremely polluted. Next slide. And this is the same place today, where we have now a harbor where you can actually go swimming. The water is clean, and the harbor is pretty much the center of attention or urban life in the summer in Copenhagen. And I think this is a strong vision that Copenhagen has been using in a lot of other work that we are doing. Is we have a problem, we have a bad economy, we have a polluted harbor, but we also wanted to see the opportunity to actually make this a great place for the citizens. So it's not just a question of cleaning the harbor, but also how to develop it. Next slide. So we also know that the city is facing threats in the future. We are looking at sea level rise and heavy rains as some of our main concerns for the future. Next. Next slide. And we've had a little bit of warning of how the future will be with a big storm in 2011, where we had 150 millimeters of rain in 2 hours. I know in Southeast Asia it might not sound much, but for a Copenhagen system, it was really a lot. We had street flooded, we had hospitals flooded, and it cost the insurance companies around $1 billion in insurance claims. And it showed that the city was vulnerable, and it led to the development of a cloudburst management plan for the city. Next. And the idea of the cloudburst management plan is actually to create a new infrastructure that is by following the natural flow of water. So the map you see here does not represent just streams in Copenhagen, but it's a visualization of a model of how water will flow on the surface. And based on that, next slide, we created the cloudburst management plan, where we had divided the city into catchment following these streams, or what to say, and for each of these catchments, we made a detailed plan of how to manage heavy rains in the future. Where were the places where we could store the water, and where were the places where we could discharge water, and so on, so that we could make sure that we would be making the citizens able to live in the city even with climate change. Next slide. And the idea of what we're doing is to make, looking again, as in the first slides about the harbor, where can we actually find things that can actually also improve life of citizens in the in our work. So when we are working with creating climate adaptation and in our cloudburst management plan, we're looking for what we call co-benefits, things that can work when it's not raining and when we do not need the infrastructure to support us for managing stormwater. And that's things like recreational value. It's about biodiversity, having spaces where you can have more nature in the city. It's about meeting places, which is not just about making citizens happy that they can go and sit in a nice park, but it actually also creates a possibility to increase social resilience, because you meet other residents in your neighborhood, you talk, you get a common understanding. Health issues, both because green infrastructure in general will support people in walking more, bicycling more, and other things, but also because having a place to go and sit in nice and quiet for a half an hour or an hour in the city is also something that's good for your health. We will also, on the long term, improve the microclimate, because we will have more green in the city, and that will help us also with urban heat island, which at the moment is not an issue in Copenhagen, but it will eventually be when the weather gets warmer. It's about having more accessibility and safety. When you are using public spaces, you also get a higher degree of safety in the city, because it's much more safe to go around in a city when there are other people out on the streets. And finally, and very importantly, creating these nice urban spaces will also support economic growth, because when people are using these spaces, local businesses will also thrive from what we are doing. Next slide. I will just go through a few examples to show you. The first one we made was this Townsville Park, which is now a very beautiful small square with also the opportunity to store water when it's raining. Next. St. Kjeld Square and Bryggervangen is one of the places where we actually were able to reduce the paved areas in this project with more than 50% by and still making sure that traffic could move around. But at the same time, we created small pocket parks that can be used for storage of water, but can also at the same time be used by citizens, and they are really being used. So it's a great improvement to the neighborhood. Next.
Look, I'll have to ask you to wrap up.
Yeah,
thank you.
And that's also, I'm coming at my last slides. St. Anne Square is placed in the center of the city. Next. Next slide. Skandiagade, an elevated boardwalk with 8 sunken gardens. Next. Enghave Park, a flood reservoir with room to store more than 22,000 cubic meters of water. Next. Next, just a picture from the park. Next slide. And finally, my last slide, Remiseparken, which is a park that has been created with both natural areas with lots of biodiversity, but also room for play. And I think that was my last slide. Next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lykke. And really happy to see presentation of my hometown in such a beautiful way. So thank you for joining and showing us these. And I'm sure you will respond if people have things they would like to share or ask you about on your email. So thank you very much. And with those, with this introduction, I would like to pass the floor on to our next speaker, Catherine O'Regan, who is the Executive Director of this Cities Leadership Institute. So Catherine has a long experience as an executive and commercial board director specializing in urban management, finance, and economic development. She's been working on developing and implementing growth strategies for cities, businesses, and governments. And she's been also working with this global non-for-profit organization dedicated to build the capacity of urban leaders. So with those few words about you, Catherine, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's fantastic to be here. I am in Sydney, and I'm on the land of the Indigenous people called Gadigal, and I of the Eora Nation. So I would like to pay my respects to elders of that particular peoples and their descendants and the emerging leaders. But Sydney's a great place, but it's only one of the many cities here in Australia. So what I thought I would do today is just share with you a couple of cities and what they're doing from a smart cities perspective, and also pull out some key lessons, which I'm hoping that you can take away and apply to your respective places. But as in that kind introduction, I've been working with hundreds of cities, both in our country and around the world. And it's always fascinating even to hear of Copenhagen and the wonderful things they're doing there. So you're always are learning. If we could move to the next slide, please. One of the things that I think's been interesting in Australia is context really matters when it comes to smart cities. You know, we are a country that has, you know, a big land mass, but our population is just under 26 million. But strangely enough, you know, 9 out of 10 people in our country live in a city. So there's these vast open spaces with not much on there. And then there's these high density cities. And it's really interesting from an economic value perspective that 80%, you know, of our economic value happens on such a small piece of land, which means from a city planning perspective, from a mapping heat, from driving better mobility solutions, it's really been concentrated in those cities. And sometimes that's been at the detriment of the regional areas where there hasn't been much population, but that's potentially changing. Governance-wise, we've got a small population, but we have many, many city governments. And some of those are managing areas which have big land masses with small people, and some of them are actually small land masses with a lot of people. So lots of different drivers and lots of different things that can make a difference to those communities. I'd like to move to the next slide. But what I thought I would do is just show you a little bit of how Australia's been coming along in terms of the smart cities journey here. And it really has been increasing in terms of its maturity and its momentum. Way back in 2017, I did a study which looked at what are cities actually doing when it comes to technology and digital. And there was really only about, at the most, 10% of our cities here that said they had a smart cities strategy. And the things that were holding them back is that smart cities means that you often think differently. And so there was real cultural change that they had to do in terms of their organisation and their government. And they didn't always have the skills and the capability to implement some of the smart city solutions. And that's where forums like today, to start thinking about how we get better at doing smart cities, become really, really important. Today, most cities actually have at least one project which they put as smart cities. And that might be addressing energy consumption, smart parking solutions, local active transport, heat mapping or water usage, and making sure, because we're a very dry country, we protect our water consumption. Or it could actually be making places safer with better lighting. But really, we've actually now got something over 45 major projects and precincts, which are centralised areas focused on smart cities and innovation. Next slide, please. So one of the things I've actually done is went, well, how good Australian smart cities? And back in February this year, the Intelligent Community Forum does their annual rating of which cities are the smartest city. And interesting enough, Australia appeared 4 times in the top 21. Very top of the list was the city of Adelaide. Now, this city had a very interesting approach. Way back in 2005, they were actually the first Australian city that put free public Wi-Fi throughout their city. So they've used telecommunications and that infrastructure as the backbone of their smart city strategy. They've moved that now and have implemented a 10 gigabyte network. And this network is attracting investment, it's attracting talent, and it's ensuring that that city operates globally. But they haven't taken that just to the boundaries of their city. They've now started to make a connection with the regional cities around them. So it's almost becoming a smart region rather than just a smart city. That's a little bit different to what's happening in a city of Prospect. This is a small regional town. It only has about 20,000 people, but it definitely has big ambitions when it comes to smart cities. And what they've done is they said it's not really about technology, it's about people. They're very high in terms of residential population. So their smart cities is focused on their high streets and integrating businesses and mixed small businesses into their local residential communities. And that's really been a revitalisation in those local areas. And they've focused on things like smart parking, smart lighting, better mobility solutions, because they're the sorts of things that mattered to the people of Prospect. Turning now to the Sunshine Coast. Now, this is a tourist town. Their economic growth is all about not just the people who live there, but the people who visit. So some of the things that they've done is really about how can they deliver really good government services, not just to those residents, but the people who are here on that short stay or the long stay, so they have a really great experience and come back in. They've taken a partnership approach and done some things with strong telecommunications and data company so that they can actually monitor what the movements and the patterns of movements and the inflow and the outflow of people. And that's informed some of the things they do from a planning perspective and a service delivery perspective. One of the things which I find really bold with the Sunshine Coast is they've now actually the first local government to install a cable fibre from Queensland in Australia to the US to ensure that they get extremely high speeds in terms of internet connection. The last city is Townsville. Now, this is a city that, again, is quite remote. And what they've done is actually said to them, smart cities is about learning. And they've partnered up with one of the major universities and worked to improve technology skills, digital skills, and then that starts to help in drive the investment where they can keep people, retain people in their city by improving the skills and the talent. They can then start to grow their population and build their economy even further. So each of these cities, and one of my key points is today, was really about working out what really matters most to your community. What happens most in terms of the place, the people, and that actually in turn determines your priorities. I'd like to move to the next slide. I just wanted to make a final couple of points. And, you know, we've all been unfortunately influenced so much by COVID. And as I said earlier, what's happened here in Australia is our population has shifted to the regions. And that's exposed some real weaknesses in terms of smart cities. We need to stop thinking about just where there's cities, but think about our regional towns. And the resilience component, that's why it was great to hear some of the Copenhagen examples, is floods, bushfires, climate change has really been escalated on our agenda. And that's really starting to drive even more smart cities programs and projects. They've been humming along, but now that's accelerated over the last year or so. And we'll definitely see more because that's what's starting to matter most to our different cities and towns. But in closing, all I wanted to say was there are some success factors that I think each of us can learn no matter what city we're in. And that's having bold leadership, that you are actually acting to change. And that leadership can come from governments, community, or business. But the important thing is to start driving that change and aligning it with what matters most to your city and to your context. But you can't do it alone. All of the cities that have done really well have brought about that through partnership, different partnerships in different ways, but it's something that you need to be strong on in terms of collaboration and co-create these solutions with your particular city. And in that way, you're building the capacity so it can happen in terms of the smart city, not just today, but tomorrow. So I'll leave those thoughts with you, and I hope there's something that you can apply to your city. And thank you very much for the opportunity today.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for very clear points and examples from Australia. And I think I was happy to hear this convergence of Copenhagen and Australia. I could at least hear two things: climate change as a driver for the development, and the co-creation principle as two core principles of developing our smart cities. And then that it's all about place and people. So we have to understand what actually matters for the people. But one last thing I thought was really interesting, global development right now, and on the back of COVID, has been this a movement from urban areas to rural areas, and I think we see that also all over Asia right now, and that creates a completely new opportunity that I think a lot of us has to learn where can it bring us. I'm sorry, we don't have space for questions and answers. I hope you'll join us for the coming sessions, either session 1 or 2. But at least I would like to thank both of you for coming in with such clear messages from both areas. And then I would like to pass on to the next slide. Thank you. So just to recap, overview of the thematic sessions, which are starting now, actually. Thematic session 1 on digitalization to support cities planning, or session 2 on how digitalization can reduce traffic congestion. Two important issues that are across the region. Next slide, please. So how to join these thematic sessions? Well, you're already in Zoom, so you don't have to sign into your Zoom account. This is only for tomorrow. But if you go from this session to the lobby, then you can choose. You can see there's a red dot here where it says sessions, and there you should be able to click in the lobby and click into either choosing session 1 or session 2. I hope it works for you. Otherwise, our excellent team headed by Christine Lucero would be there to support you. If you are still in the chat, you're welcome to chat with Christine. And otherwise, next slide, please. We have just a plea in terms of evaluating when you've finalized today or tomorrow the whole sessions. Please do give us an evaluation of this this networking conference, and you're also welcome to ask for a certificate of participation. Some officials would like to have that as well by the end tomorrow. That's all from our introduction part now, and so hopefully see you in the upcoming sessions or for the closing tomorrow. Again, thank you very much, Catherine and Lege, for joining in, and be in contact later. Thank you.